So, hello there to all who are watching this. This is something I've been thinking about doing for some time. Anyhow, here goes. Does voting make a difference? Some adamantly say no, there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. Both are bourgeois establishment parties. Now, I'm an anarchist, so I've run into this argument, and I've run into it a lot. Of course both parties are bourgeois and pro-establishment. That much is obvious. But that's not the question. The question was, does voting make a difference? Not, can voting bring about revolutionary social change all by itself? As a digression, many of that not a dime's worth of difference crowd tend to call Trump a fascist. And they're right, by the way. By any reasonable measure of fascism, he is a fascist. Thankfully, he's pretty incompetent at it. Within a year of taking power, both Hitler and Mussolini had created a full-fledged fascist state. Making a video like this, if the technology had existed to do it then, would have endangered my life. But yes, Trump's a fascist. It's also pretty clear that whatever Joe Biden's faults, he is not a fascist. No, he's not perfect. He seems to be in the back pocket of the cop unions, like many Democrats are. He stupidly backed George W. Bush's Iraq War. And those are just two examples. There's a lot more. But he's not a fascist. If fascism is merely whatever happens to be politically to the right of what I personally like, then the term has lost its meaning. It means more than that. It means an ideology that is outside the normal bounds of liberalism and conservatism in a bourgeois state. As limited and fucked up as the freedoms under the bourgeois state are, it could easily be much, much worse. And although Trump is attacking freedoms more slowly and incompetently than Hitler or Mussolini did, he is still attacking them. We've seen concentration camps where families are separated. We've seen Trump openly encourage extrajudicial killings, both by the cops and by private goon squads, the latter chillingly reminiscent of a latter-day SA. Let this sort of thing continue for 4 more years and things will get worse. And not just slightly worse, they'll get much, much worse. To say there's no meaningful difference between Trump and Biden is basically saying there's no meaningful difference between a fascist and a non-fascist. And really now, would you also claim that Churchill was as bad as Hitler? No, I'm not arguing that Churchill was perfect. Feed Bengal famine of 1943 into the search engine of your choice for one particularly egregious example of Churchill's evil and misconduct. But really, no difference? You honestly can't say if you'd rather be a Jew or a socialist in 1940 UK or 1940 Germany? Then we get to how every time a Republican wins a presidential election, a good chunk of that not a dime's worth of difference crowd, and by good chunk I mean most of it, tends to get mysteriously glum and angry for a while. And they don't get mysteriously glum or angry when the Democrat wins. Now, as you can see from looking at me, I've been around the block a few times, so I've observed the aftermath of more than a few U.S. presidential elections. And clearly that not a dime's worth of difference crowd doesn't actually believe their own rhetoric. Their words may be saying one thing, but their behavior says quite another. If you really believe, as I do, that Trump is a fascist and you are an anti-fascist, then you have the responsibility to do whatever it takes to get Trump out of office. Whatever it takes, even if that means holding your nose and voting for Sleepy Joe. And no, this doesn't mean you can only vote. It doesn't mean that you're giving your consent or you're buying into the system. Some in the system may think that, but I don't care what the system thinks, and neither should you. There's nothing stopping me, or you, or anyone else, from walking and chewing gum at the same time. A person can vote, and that same person can also engage in other forms of political action. Anyhow, to sum it all up, if Trump is a fascist, if Biden is not a fascist, if the masses do not presently have the level of political consciousness necessary to motivate them to revolt, if changing that last fact is going to take a lot more time than from now until Election Day, if the game is rigged so that there are only two viable candidates, i.e. if Trump loses, Biden must win, and if you won't do anything to help Biden win, well, let's just say I have a very hard time taking your professed anti-fascism as a very meaningful thing. Anyhow, that's my thoughts for today. I'll see you all later.